Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of TP Talks. For those who have attended a previous session, welcome back. And for those who are here for the first time, you picked a great day to be here. Today's session is actually the second in a two-part series this week, the first of which was yesterday and was 3 ways to bridge the gap for curating an economical customer experience. It featured Katrina Manzigian from Everest Group and Melissa O'Brien from HFS Research. And today, I'm really excited to be here because we've got a separate session where we're going to be discussing 5 best practices for fraud prevention and minimizing operational risks. And it also features 2 new guests, Michael DeSalis from Frost & Sullivan and Alan Winters from Teleperformance. So if that's what you were hoping to experience here today, you've been to the right place. So as for me, my name is John Machinsky. I'm Executive Vice President and Customer Experience Strategist at Teleperformance, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's events. Now, first, we'll talk a little bit about a few housekeeping items here today. So, the event itself is full of all sorts of handy widgets for you. There are several related resources that are available for you to download. If you take a look at the widget to the right of your screen, one is the ebook for curating an economical customer experience. There's also a Frost & Sullivan white paper, Engineering a Culture of Security Consciousness in Customer Service. And there's a white paper on security risk assessments, helping protect customers all over the world. And then there's a report from Teleperformance Security. Now, this webinar is designed to be interactive, so you're going to see multiple icons on your screen there. You've got a yellow box there with a question mark for tech support. You've also got an opportunity to be able to reach us with that blue box there, so it's an icon to send us an email. And then lastly here too, you've got a Q&A window to the left side of your screen. And at the end of this session, we'll have an opportunity to answer questions that you may have over the course of this webinar. I might suggest that you take that opportunity to go ahead and get those submitted early, and we'll answer as many of those as we can as we go along. Now, first, a little bit about TP Talks. TP Talks is an online forum where we bring together clients and industry experts to provide learnings, perspectives on a variety of topics, which others have told us are especially important to them. Now, we know how valuable that your time is, so what we do is we set this up in easy to schedule and easy to digest bite-sized 30-minute nuggets. Now, I suspect there are some people that are joining us here today that aren't familiar with the host of TP Talks, Teleperformance. So let's spend just a few minutes to get you introduced. Teleperformance is the world's leading customer experience management organization with 217,000 employees, servicing clients from 340 locations in 74 countries around the world. And we speak to the equivalent of 40% of the world's population every year. So in the context of today's discussion, that's a whole lot of calls, chats, emails, social media interactions, video chats, and face-to-face transactions, and pretty much any other channel you can imagine that we need to monitor and to secure for our clients. It's a huge task, and frankly, it's an even bigger priority. Now, Teleperformance has made and continues to make tremendous investments in the areas of data security and fraud prevention. And we've been recognized as the industry leader in this area by many of our clients and analysts, including those that are shown here. We also take our certification seriously. And as you can see here, we are the most certified company in our space anywhere in the world. Now, as you're going to be hearing about today, certifications for us really are a starting point and a good baseline, but a truly differentiated solution consists of much more than that, and that's really the focus of today's discussion. So with that, and without any further delay, it's on to our guest speakers. Now again, I can't tell you how excited I am to be here introducing these particular 2 gentlemen. Both are highly respected leaders in what they do, and are highly sought after as both speakers and pundits. So a little bit about them. First, Michael DeSalis is the Principal Analyst with the Contact Center Group at Frost & Sullivan. He focuses on monitoring and analyzing emerging trends, technologies, and market dynamics in the contact center industry. Now, he brings with him over 20 years of industry experience spanning contact center operations management, customer service and support, agent supervision, sales management, and project management in call centers. And then on the right, you see Alan Winters. And for Alan, as the Deputy Chief Global Compliance Officer and Chief Privacy Officer for Teleperformance, Alan Winters is responsible for the global compliance functions for the Teleperformance Group. Alan chairs the Global Compliance and Security Council for Teleperformance as a member of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Task Force for International Association, he's on the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP, a member of the Center for Information Policy Leadership, and sits on the General Data Protection Regulation Committee. So with that, I know that we've got a lot of information that these two gentlemen are going to cover, so why don't we first turn it on over to Michael. And I guess to kick things off, Michael, now as an analyst, you've been tracking security for quite a while. I know we've had many discussions on this. And you visit contact centers worldwide. So what is the current fraud landscape in contact centers, and what do you see?
Thanks so much, John, and thanks for having me on the webinar. You know, I've gained a lot of insight into contact center security thanks to the service provider community, both large and small, that have allowed me to visit their sites, not only here in the U.S., but also nearshore, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and abroad. So believe me, I see a wide variety of call center and security environments. I also see a lot of gaps and vulnerabilities depending on the service provider, the country I'm in, and the size of the center. So I wanted to put up a graphic here that shows what I call a holistic view of the contact center security landscape, and I divided it into three main areas. The first is the physical or facility security area, then network security, which most of us are familiar with and think about when it comes to hacking, authentication, malware, even ransomware, and then finally security compliance as it relates to specific industry standards for local, state, federal, and even international requirements that have to be met in contact center environments. I believe that the vulnerabilities and the opportunities for an attack for fraud are immense in these three areas, and there are lots of assets to protect. I also think it's critical that we not forget disaster recovery and business continuity, including natural disasters and even sabotage. So I think about three common threat sources, kind of a trifecta that would include natural threats like floods, earthquakes, fires, certainly human threats, workplace violence, terrorist acts, arson, deliberate actions on the part of employees, and then finally environmental threats, which could be things like long-term power failures, pollution, chemical and hazardous materials leakage. So here, I wanted to mention that current research points to the fact that the majority of fraud attacks involve at least one point person working on the inside. And I think this is particularly problematic in contact centers. So you might ask, why is this? And there are three basic reasons. The first is that they have large populations of employees. Second is the agents have access to confidential customer information and their personal data. And then finally, and this is kind of the bane of the industry, there's a typically high turnover rate where you see new hires coming in constantly. So in my opinion, based on discussions with people like Alan that sit in the Chief Information Security Office place, that agent fraud within captive or an outsourced contact center represents the most significant and pernicious threat. And one of the primary information security threats related to contact centers occurs when employees conduct unauthorized access to that same private and confidential data without a business need to access that data. So when it comes to fraud, and you consider the entire landscape I laid out before you, I can point to several obvious sources of contact center, quote-unquote, insider entry points. Besides the agents, we don't think about this often. It could be a supervisor, a quality analyst, an account manager, or another employee. In the contact center, you'll find contractors, maintenance teams, catering and food vendors, janitorial crews. There are also third-party suppliers of computer equipment and office equipment. In contact centers, you will also see telephony providers, carriers, and electrical subcontractors. And then finally, you've got visitors like me, maybe clients, prospects, and analysts that come into the contact center. So John, I'll stop there and turn it back to you.
Hey, Michael, it's Alan. I'll jump in and take over and head to the next slide.
Great.
That'd be perfect. So, and Alan, if you don't mind, just to tee you up here, apologies here, gentlemen. I wanted to say here that, again, Michael, very much appreciate the fact that you've been able to provide us with some guidance regarding the global perspective and what you're seeing overall in the industry. And then what we've got up next is a perspective regarding some best practices that Alan has been able to help to facilitate here within Teleperformance and as well that we thought we would share for the group. So Alan, I'll turn it on over to you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and so I have a 2 or 3 slides that I'll talk to, and you know, this is, as John mentioned at the beginning, this is just a couple of nuggets of what we do, but I think it plays really hand in hand to what Michael just described in terms of the threat landscape, specifically around agent fraud activity, as well as visitors on the call center floor and such like that. But let me start with kind of what I view as from a overarching perspective. I think one of the best practices that we certainly see, and I see when I'm out in the industry, is really the integration of compliance, privacy, and security as a single function. That's certainly what we've done within Teleperformance, and I view that as a best practice because often what we see is that each of those 3 disciplines end up being a competing activity if it's managed independently, where really they're complementary actions and processes, and to really have a true holistic approach to compliance, data privacy, and data security, they really need to work hand in hand. And what we've done within Teleperformance is to drive that to a single culture and process, which I view as a best practice. If I go to the next slide, now along with that, so we've now talked about standardizing or bringing those 3 disciplines together. The way you kind of bring it together and the glue that holds it together is really what we would call our global essential compliance and security policies. And for Teleperformance, and every company is a little different, but Teleperformance, we have 14, what we would say these are table stakes. These are the benchmark compliance and security processes that are consistent around the globe. So if you went to one of our centers in Bogota, Colombia, one of our centers in the U.S., to a center in London or the UK, you would see the exact same process, managed the exact same way, delivered the exact same way, and that ensures a consistent approach to security and compliance. And to Michael's point a few minutes ago, an example of these programs would be things like infrastructure hardening or locking down of the desktop. So data, the secured private data that we manage on behalf of our clients cannot be taken outside of that client system, or login provisioning and badging process that would minimize and mitigate any potential fraud activity from any third-party vendor, the cleaning crew, the kitchen crew, the security company, or any visitors coming into the call center production floor. So it's a mechanism to manage that activity, track it, and mitigate any potential potential wrongdoing. The other aspect of this is obviously there needs to be an exception process, and we have that process built in through our Global Compliance and Security Council that John mentioned at the beginning of the call that I chair. And that is really done because there are many cases based on the geographies that we operate in where there are certain regulatory or legal requirements that require changes. And so obviously from a best practice perspective, you'd want to have a flexible program managed tightly, but allows you then to manage to whatever the local regulation or federal regulation in the geography that you happen to to operate in. And so that the GECSPs really speak to how you manage, or how we manage from a best practice perspective, what's within our four walls. The next step would be what is outside of our control, or what does our client bring to us from a system perspective that could potentially drive additional risk into the environment. And so we've developed what we call our security risk assessment, which is basically a tool, and I have a team that manages this tool for us, and it basically allows us to look at our client system and tools, and we look at it based on how our client is asking us to utilize that tool and develop potential risks from a fraud perspective. So is there open Wi-Fi, or does the system allow cut and paste or copy, or in a financial services case, is a full credit card number shown? Is the CVV code shown? Or in healthcare, is PII or HIPAA-related data full disclosure? And if the answer to that is yes, then that enables us to do an analysis and then implement mitigating actions and steps that we can actually integrate into our process at the call center level to minimize any potential fraud that could take place as a result of those activities. The other aspect of the risk assessment is then we develop then a very detailed report that my team and I then share with our clients, and we review the process that we went through, all of the issues that we have identified, and then work together to minimize those potential risks, whether that may be changes on our client systems, changes on our systems, process enhancements, and such. And that we found that partnering together certainly drives a lot more comfort in the ability to deliver a secure environment for our representatives and also for the customers of our clients. Excuse me. If I did now go to, let me just kind of summarize what I went through is our, three examples of best practices, but I would tell you if I looked at it holistically and just looked at it, the top five, certainly CEO sponsorship is key. I mean, in order to drive the changes or best practices that we've discussed, it really requires a culture change within the organization. And we all know as business leaders, one of the best ways to drive a culture change is leadership from the top. And so we certainly have that within Teleperformance. I report into the audit committee of the board of directors, as also into our chairman. They are intimately involved in every aspect of the programs that I've walked through as examples today, and they lead by example as they're out in our operations on a weekly and monthly basis. I would also say the holistic security consciousness aspect of it, and so you can't just implement tools and processes without that consciousness level buy-in from our people. We do that through our security awareness training and other materials that we distribute through our organization. I would also say that, excuse me, from a technology perspective, we've integrated proprietary technology that Teleperformance has developed to help us detect and track agent activity. And we do that in partnership with our clients, and that's a key way for us to really act in a very proactive manner to mitigate and minimize any potential activity. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, the integration of the compliance, privacy, and security function, that all rolls up into me as an example within Teleperformance, and I can direct activities across those three disciplines based on our process and program, and frankly, based on what we see within the environment. Those standardized processes, the GECSPs or Global Essential Compliance and Security Policies, and then finally kind of tied it all up through our security risk assessment and really how we manage those vulnerabilities that are outside of our four walls of our operations. So John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alan. And again, we've got some time here at the end of the session here to be able to go through some questions. We've got a few that have been sent through here already. But if anybody does have any questions you'd like, go ahead and submit those again through the widget on your screen there, and we'd be happy to get to as many of those as we can here today. So why don't we kick things off with a question, I think, for you, Michael. So I guess the question is culture and trying to integrate a culture of security consciousness in contact centers. So it's not just a thing you do, I assume, with instituting a few processes and best practices here, but how do you establish that culture? Where do you start?
Thanks, John. That's a great question. I get that a lot. Like Alan said, everything begins at the top with the CEO, that type of leadership, along with executive leader support along the line. And I think the organization has to make a decision that security is simply a top priority within the entire organization. And so the other thing, too, is you've got to build daily awareness with employees, to me, is a fraud deterrent in and of itself. You know, it's about reminding agents daily that protecting the organization from fraud also makes a good case for long-term employment and job security. The other thing that I see, too, is prosecution of people that commit fraud sends a very strong signal throughout the organization. You know, not only here in the U.S., but in other geographies, criminal organizations make it their business to launch sometimes large-scale attacks to steal from bank accounts and credit cards, or upload even employee information and get their hands on Social Security numbers in order to perpetrate an identity theft. So it's pointed out beforehand, this is especially true in contact center environments. So I think it's imperative that there is what I call an institutional security culture kind of baked into the DNA of the organization. Okay,
perfect. Thank you, Michael. The next question we've got coming in, I think, really applies to both of you here. So I'd love it if both of you have an opportunity to be able to speak to this then. So, you know, we talk a lot about here so far about the various best practices that are out there. But what are the best-in-class security practices that you see today on the production floor and ways to deter agent fraud? So what's something that you see taking place today that maybe didn't exist or wasn't focused on a few years ago? And I'll throw that out to either one of you.
Hey, John, it's Alan. I'll take the first time at that. And so, you know, one of the things that we've seen from a benchmarking perspective, and this may sound, you know, pretty common sense, but I would say the first one is, and it goes a little bit to what Michael was just talking about, which is, I'll talk about culture, and then I'll get into a couple of best practices. But not only, as Michael said, that, you know, the risk is that we have people, and contact centers play a significant role in potential fraud. But one of the strengths is that we have people. And so if you build a culture as we have, which is if you see something, say something. So if you see something out of the ordinary, raise your hand and say something. That is a huge advantage to minimize and mitigate potential fraudulent activities. So that's kind of the table stakes. And then if you add in things like, so everyone has a card key access with a picture ID, and I can only get on a call center floor or production floor that I'm actually servicing, and I can't go someplace else, or, you know, that just because you happen to work at the company doesn't mean you need access to the production floor if you have no reason to have access to the production floor. And then if you add into that with then dual factor authentication on login credentialing, and Michael said, you know, at the beginning that most operational call centers have challenges around attrition. So what do you do with the login credentialing when someone leaves, if someone resigns or is no longer with the company? How quickly do you deactivate that login credential so that can't be used for potential fraud? All of that type of activity, which really tightens up the network, so to speak, to minimize that actual potential. And then I kind of referenced it also from the actual desktop itself. So what are you doing to minimize the potential actions that someone can take at the desktop level? Some dependent on our client systems and some dependent on our own. But what are you doing to minimize that? And I'll give you a great example, which is one of the differentiators with the AT&T award that we won that you referenced at the beginning, which is that, is a representative, can they type any random string of text into an open field on the desktop? Versus can you provide a secured note-taking process, which we do, that enables you to wipe the note away at any interval that you choose. Could be on a time basis, could automatically be at the end of a phone call or the end of a production day. All of that gives the representative the tool they need to service the customer, but then minimizes and eliminates that potential fraud activity by them typing information into the system that you may not want typed in to be able to then take away at a later time. So it's those type of actions that we see as best practices.
Yeah,
okay.
Alan, this is Michael. I have a few to add too, because again, I'm in contact centers all the time, and so probably the first one that's really important is written security policies and building access procedures, including signage, actual signage that talks about security, and posters. The other is that employees have to review and sign a security agreement every single year as a part of their appraisal review. The other that I see is a clean desk policy, and believe it or not, I don't see that in all environments where there's no paper, no cell phones allowed, and so employees are using individual lockers for those kinds of things to enforce that same clean desk policy. The other that I see, and this is a little more advanced, is video surveillance, where you've got zoom and pan cameras, as well as motion sensors for entrances, for interior doors, maybe equipment cages, and then critical equipment locations throughout the building. The other that I think, Alan, to your point, is critically important is that you have an employee hotline to report suspicious activity and fraud.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that too, Michael and Alan. We got time maybe for one more question here, and one that's come in here is in regards to the government sector. So maybe, Alan, this is for you. So how do you see the government sector as being the same or different in terms of fraud prevention and the fraud landscape and whatnot as compared to what you see on the commercial side?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. So certainly from the government support side, many of the times we would see a lot more stricter compliance requirement and security requirement. The good thing is for us is based on those DECSPs that I had mentioned and Clean Desk and other things that Michael talked about are all part of that. We would see that that would be able to minimize or mitigate many of the potential risks. I will tell you, however, that depending on the branch of the government and whether there's a sub-processor or where most of the risk would come into play is if a company is contracted with that government agency and then they sub-process to another agency or another company to help service them. That the challenge and best practice we would see is that agreement between the original contracting entity and the sub-processor needs to be very tight. So you have to have very strict and very, very similar processes, for example, that we would have with our own center that you would then have with that sub-processor as well. So, Michael, I don't know if you have anything you would want to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it, Alan. Thanks.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think we're going to move on from questions here, just for a couple of items here at the very end. So, as we move on to the next slide here, everybody should be seeing a new resource here then as well. So as part of this, we've also got access that we're providing here to a few other things that may be helpful for everybody coming out of the session. One is there's a new tab that you may be noticing opening up in your browser here that will provide you with more details regarding the teleperformance security practice. So the details we're able to provide here were somewhat limited here given the time constraint that we had here, but the link you've got should be able to provide you with much greater detail on some of the items that were discussed and some other areas that we weren't able to get into here today. And then next, there's another resource here too. As we mentioned, this session is one in a series of TP Talk sessions, and with that, we've got access for everybody here for the other pre-recorded sessions that we've got that have been previously done. So feel free to go ahead and click on any of those, then you'll have access to any of the TP Talk sessions that you would have missed in the past. So that brings us really then to the end here, where we do want to make sure that everybody is aware that there is an on-demand version of the webcast that's going to be available here in about a day from now. And there are also a few other resources that we're going to be making available to everybody. We talked about the ebook of curating an economical customer experience. There's the Frost & Sullivan white paper on engineering a culture of security consciousness in customer service. A white paper on security risk assessment, helping protect customers all over the world, and then finally a report on teleperformance security program. So all four of those are also going to be available here for anybody who would like to download any of those then too. And that does take us here to the bottom of the hour here, everybody. So I do want to thank everybody then for attending here today. I would very much like to thank both Michael and Alan for a very informative session. I do look forward to having all of you join us again for our next TP Talk session, which will be scheduled very soon. So I hope this has been informative for everybody, and I hope everybody does have a great day. Take care, everyone.